Our next speaker today is Julie Strawn, who so graciously stepped in for her colleague, Karen Martinson, who couldn't be with us today because of an injury. I understand she's doing better. But we're thrilled to have Ms. Strawn with us today. She's a principal associate at Apt Associates with 30 years of experience developing and analyzing policies and programs to help low-income adults gain the skills and credentials needed to advance better jobs. And Ms. Strawn got into this work early in her career when she joined the staff of a Tennessee congressman, primarily to cover foreign policy at the beginning, but she was also part of staff that held field hearings in the district to investigate why only 1 in 4 adults there had a high school education, and she was profoundly moved by the depth of the Appalachian poverty she saw. For example, hollers with no running water or electricity, and this was in the mid-1980s. She was also moved by the hunger of the people she met for a chance to learn so that they could improve their lives and those of their children. And so Julie left foreign policy behind and has worked ever since on ways to help low-income adults gain the knowledge and skills to escape poverty. Ms. Strawn earned her master's degree in public affairs from the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton University and has worked for the National Governors Association, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the U.S. House of Representatives. And she previously conducted research in Wisconsin as the designer and lead of the Shifting Gears Initiative, which provided technical assistance and peer learning opportunities to 6 Midwestern states, initiative to scale up and sustain innovation in adult education, workforce development, and post-secondary education. And now at Apt, she's currently working on the Pathways for Advancing Careers in Education, or PACE project, which she'll talk about, a rigorous evaluation considered to be the first large-scale national assessment of career pathways. So please welcome Julie Strawn and her presentation, Engaging All Workers in Wisconsin's Economy, What Does the Evidence Tell Us?
Thanks, Heidi. Good morning. Okay, so oops. Oh, sorry. Here we go. So I'm just going to build really on where Tessa started us off with in terms of thinking about what are changes that are happening in the economy, what are some of the challenges low-income workers face to entering jobs, to keeping jobs, moving up in jobs over time, what strategies show the most promise for helping those low-income workers, and some key takeaways. So as Tessa mentioned, there are some structural challenges in the labor market to low-income workers moving ahead. Geographic mismatch, low-wage, part-time jobs. But beyond that, there are additional challenges that low-income workers can face. So things like logistical barriers, which might include lack of affordable childcare, transportation, barriers to gaining skills for family-supporting jobs, which might include coming up with the money to pay for tuition, but also it's very hard if you're a low-income parent to work full-time, go to school, take care of your children. So having that additional challenge of maybe having to cut back on work to afford school, but then your income drops because of that. Low basic skills is another common barrier to moving up in the workforce for low-income adults. And then there is a smaller portion of the low-income adult workforce that faces, more severe barriers, physical and mental health issues, disability, domestic violence, substance abuse, and other things. Fortunately, we do know a lot about what kinds of strategies can help low-income workers keep, retain, and advance in the workforce. I'm going to talk today about 4 sort of leading strategies. One is specialized services and treatment for those who do have multiple barriers to employment. The second group of strategies has to do with financial incentives and work supports. Third is training that happens at the workplace in partnership with employers. And fourth is education and training, primarily through community technical colleges, community-based organizations, and others. Just wanted to point out that these different strategies are not mutually exclusive. In fact, you you probably need some of all of them because they're really appropriate for different parts of the low-income adult workforce. So if you think about things like childcare, like the earned income tax credit, those might actually be of benefit to most low-income workers. Education and training, that again can benefit a wide swath of the low-income workers. Subsidized employment is really a more specialized intervention for people who need a particular sort of boost in the labor market, and then specialized services are, again, a smaller subset of people, but very important for those who need it. So specialized services. So this approach is really aimed at addressing underlying barriers and focusing on improving employability. So it usually starts with conducting in-depth assessments, coming up with a service plan, and then providing directly or arranging through referral specialized services and treatment. So these are things like help with chronic health issues, maybe learning disabilities, mental health services, substance abuse treatment, and so on. Communities and programs really need to look at the populations they serve to sort of see how widespread these kinds of multiple barriers might be. In general, I can tell you the most common one for, say, welfare recipients is very low basic skills. About half of welfare recipients nationally don't have a high school diploma. In Wisconsin, it's more like a third, but still a large number of those on TANF. But beyond that, we know from things like the PIAC survey, International Survey of Adult Skills in the US, that even about 60% of those with low skills actually have a high school diploma. So it's not, you can't really rely just on that as a proxy for how many people need help with basic skills to get ahead. Beyond that big issue of low basic skills, other issues are less common. The most common after that are physical and mental health issues that limit work, and at least among the TANF population, that's about 1 in 4. Among low-income women, there are other barriers that are less common than for low-income men. So I know Mark's going to talk in a minute here about the reentry population, but things like criminal records, opioid addiction can be a big issue in certain populations, less so for low-income women than for low-income men. One model I'd like to mention that is an example of providing specialized services is the Individual Placement and Support Program. So this is a model which actually is in about 26 counties in Wisconsin that has shown really strong effects in the literature for increasing employment and a range of other outcomes. And basically, it places people quickly into competitive jobs. So these are just regular jobs. They're not sheltered workshops. They're not subsidized jobs. But what it does is, once it's placed individuals in these regular jobs, it wraps around a lot of supports around it. So folks are getting mental health treatment. They have a whole team of people working with them. They get mental health treatment. They get, if they need it, substance abuse treatment potentially. They may have people go in with them to the work site and see if they need particular accommodations for a disability to get the job done. And the supports continue indefinitely. So as long as anyone in this program needs support to keep on working in their job, they can get it from this program. A second group of strategies has to do with financial incentives and work supports. So these are things like the earned income tax credit, wage supplements, which might be like earned income disregards in welfare programs, child care, SNAP, and Medicaid are examples of work supports. And one interesting thing in the evidence about this is that not only do wage supplements, tax credits, and these other supports like childcare, not only do they increase employment and earnings among individuals, they also, for employers, reduce turnover. So it's a win-win for both workers and employers. Another important effect of policies that both increase employment and increase family income, like some of these financial incentives, work supports can, is that they increase children's academic achievement in the low-income families who receive these wage supplements and supports. So there are some, we've tested a lot of different kinds of welfare to work and other kinds of employment and training programs over the last 20, 30 years. Many of them have increased employment, fewer of them have increased earnings, and fewer still have increased income, because often when people go to work, other benefits fall by the wayside, and they sometimes don't wind up better off financially. So these kinds of policies can make sure that families' incomes go up as they go to work, and that's important for children's outcomes. An example of a financial incentives model here in Wisconsin was the New Hope initiative in Milwaukee from the 1990s. It provided an earnings supplement, health care, child care, and for a smaller number of people, community service jobs if they couldn't find a regular job. Over an 8-year period, the program increased employment, income, parents' well-being, and children's academic achievement. Third set of strategies is training that happens at the workplace. So these really fall into kind of two main groups. One is subsidized employment, the other is apprenticeship. In the subsidized employment field, again, it sort of breaks down into a couple different categories. There's a set of subsidized employment programs that really try to help people who have not been in the workforce, who might have multiple barriers to working, sort of transition into regular jobs. Those are called transitional jobs programs, and Mark's going to talk about some of those in a moment. So I will move on to the other ones, but a second version of subsidized employment is really for actually higher skilled workers, and that's on-the-job training through the workforce system. So these are wage subsidies paid to employers for a limited amount of time to help offset the cost of training workers at the workplace. Apprenticeships, I think you're all pretty familiar with. I know Wisconsin's got a long history of doing apprenticeships, but typically these are fairly long programs where people are paid while they're working. They're getting on-the-job training. There's also a classroom component. You know, in the past, apprenticeships have been pretty small scale in the United States, but there is a lot of work being done right now to change that and to expand the use of apprenticeships, partly by going into different kinds of industries and occupations than in the past, so not just skilled trades, for example, but healthcare and other areas. And there are also some interesting initiatives, like in South Carolina, where it's sort of statewide initiatives to use combinations of tax credits and aggressive marketing by their community and technical colleges, and really lots of hands-on assistance with employers to help them figure out, you know, what skills they need from workers, how to train for those skills, working with those colleges to create customized curricula, and just, you know, really making it easy for them to offer apprenticeship. The evidence on subsidized employment is quite strong for the period that people are in subsidized jobs. So while they're in subsidized jobs, you see much higher employment earnings, you see positive effects on outcomes for children, you see just decreased reliance on welfare, decreased criminal justice involvement, lots of good outcomes. The employment and earnings outcomes in some subsidized employment programs, those continued after the subsidized jobs ended. In other cases, not. So the evidence is a little bit more mixed there, but interestingly, a lot of these other outcomes, like around children's outcomes, persisted after the subsidized jobs ended, even if the employment outcomes didn't. For the programs that were studied that included cost-benefit studies, the subsidized employment programs were cost-effective. And those with longer lasting interventions and with sort of comprehensive supports around them were more likely to have lasting effects. An example of a subsidized employment program that's statewide is Washington State's Community Jobs Program. So this is a statewide subsidized employment program for TANF recipients. They've served about 25,000 TANF recipients in these jobs since the program was created. And they do it by contracting out with community-based organizations around the state to offer the jobs. And the evaluation done by the state found that it increased employment by about 14 to 24%. I mentioned apprenticeship. We're actually right in the middle of doing a big national evaluation of apprenticeship, so we'll know more a few years down the road. But the studies that we do have suggest pretty high returns on the investment to both taxpayers and for workers. One reason for that is apprenticeship is really a good value from the point of view of government and workers, because employers are paying for the wages, employers are paying for the training for the most part. So, and workers, because they're getting paid while they train, they don't have to give up, they don't have to reduce earnings and take that hit. So you can see why it's a good value, but also why then it's important to make it as easy as possible for employers to engage in apprenticeship because they're already bearing other costs of it. You may have heard of the American Apprenticeship Grants Initiative. This is a large national grants program still underway. We're evaluating it, but there are a couple of Wisconsin grantees I just wanted to point out in that program. So the fourth strategy I wanted to talk about is education and training. So one question, just stepping back from it, is why focus on helping low-income workers increase their skills? Because, you know, as Tessa pointed out, there are a lot of job openings out there that people with a high school diploma or less can get. The most important reason, really, is if you're, and because we're here at a family impact seminar today, if you're interested in improving outcomes for families and children, then skills are really the gateway to middle-class jobs, and particularly post-secondary credentials. So I know we heard a few minutes ago the fastest growing jobs in the state are those for high school diploma and less. I believe from the data I've seen, about half of the jobs in the state currently are these middle skill jobs, though, that require somewhere between a high school diploma and an associate degree. So that is an opportunity for low-income workers, maybe the ones who are working right now but can't get ahead because they don't have the skills to qualify for better paying, higher skilled jobs. It's an opportunity in a tight labor market to both help them, but also, importantly, help employers. So another reason to focus on helping low-income workers increase their skills is that we've seen the limits of past employment and training strategies, particularly ones that were carried out in the 1980s and 1990s, where they really focused strongly on just placing people quickly into jobs, or alternatively, they often just referred people over for basic education, GED classes, unconnected to employment. And both of those strategies had some success with increasing short-term employment and earnings. But what you saw is very quickly, 2 years, 3 years after people entered the program, those in the control group, those who did not get those services, caught up. They found the same kinds of low-wage, low-skilled jobs. So there wasn't any lasting added value. And that's sort of the threshold question for where, when you think about as a state, as a nation, where should we invest public dollars? Just thinking about what's the value add? How are we going to make a difference beyond how people would do on their own? And a third reason to focus on skills is what I mentioned earlier about children's academic achievement. So one set of policy strategies has to do with programs that raise family income, like wage incentives or tax credits. That can have positive effects on children's academic achievement. But also, what we've seen in the research is that when low-income parents go back to school and when they raise their skills, their children do better in school. So both of those mechanisms are separate and important. Among the various skill upgrading strategies we've studied, a couple of the most promising are career pathways and industry partnerships. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of those. This chart actually, before I get into that, just illustrates what I was saying about the importance of post-secondary credentials for middle-class jobs. So if you look at the bar on the left, these two lower bars are workers with a high school diploma or less. So you can see in 1970, about 3/4 of those working in middle-class jobs, these are just middle-class jobs, about 3/4 of those middle-class jobs only needed to have a high school diploma or less. By 2007, now all of a sudden we're down to about 40%. And it's this group here, college and associate degree, where a lot of the opportunity is in the short term for low-income adults. So what are career pathways? So career pathway programs essentially bundle together a number of individual elements that have evidence behind them. So things like partnerships of employers in an industry with training providers, things like structured pathways through community and technical colleges so that students are really clear on what it takes to achieve their goals, how to get there quickly. Support services, like sometimes we call them career navigators, but essentially individuals who are a single point of contact for the student at a community technical college and really helps them navigate their way both through college but also into employment. And things like bridge courses. So bridge courses integrate basic skills, education, and job training together so that folks who do have that barrier of low basic skills aren't automatically shut out of training for post-secondary credentials, but have a way into those programs. This is a graphic just sort of showing the career pathways concept. You can see the idea is that there's a place to start no matter what your skill level is. So maybe you're an incumbent worker and you're coming in at the mid-level skilled jobs, but you want to get your associate degree to get a pay bump. Maybe you're coming in with low basic skills down here. And wherever you come in, the idea is these credentials are stackable so that all along the way, if you take a short-term certificate program, you earn credits that then get you partway toward maybe a technical diploma, which then again gets you partway toward an associate degree. An example, which I'm not going to go into because we're a little short on time, is Project Quest, which is in Texas, San Antonio, Texas, and provided wraparound support to help people complete job training in targeted industries that were in demand in the community. So there's financial aid, there was tutoring, personal academic counseling, and mandatory weekly meetings that brought together the students as a group for support, but also to help them work through some life skills and work readiness things. Project Quest, we now have 6 years of data on, and you can see that early on, while they were still in school, their earnings were lower than the control group, the blue line. But 6 years out, they're earning about $5,000 more a year than people in the control group, and it's still growing 6 years out, those earnings impacts, which is pretty unusual for employment training program. Heidi mentioned I'm involved in the Pathways to Advancing Careers in Education project, but there's really 3 large-scale career pathways evaluations going on right now. We have some results out from PACE already, and What we're seeing is very promising. People are completing training, earning credentials at a higher rate. One of the sites is replicating Project Quest, and we're seeing some of the biggest impacts ever seen in the research on completing community college programs. These early results are not looking at employment and earnings yet, because people are just finishing up their programs, but we will have follow-on studies over the next several years that track employment and earnings. One of the PACE sites is Madison College, right here. Again, I'm not going to go over this because we're a little short on time, but that's in the packet if you're interested in seeing what they were doing. Wisconsin's also gotten a number of grants from the TACT program, which is one of the grant evaluations I just mentioned. And then I just want to just leave you with a little bit of information on what other states are doing. So the National Skills Coalition recently did a 50-state survey. These are results of policies that are related to some of the things we've talked about, some of the strategies I've talked about. And you can see about a third of the states have things like integrated basic education and training. Again, about a third have stackable credential policies. About half have job-driven financial aid policies, so that's financial aid for low-income workers getting certificates and so on. A big issue, though, and you can see Wisconsin is included as one of the states doing some of these things. The big issue really is scale. So, I know from my previous work here in Wisconsin, there is lots of great stuff going on in individual communities and technical colleges. I know from some of these other states, they have very exciting things going on in individual places. But when you look at the population of low-income workers, the numbers of them, and you look at how many people are served by these kinds of programs, we're just really scratching the surface. So I encourage you, as you think about options for the state, to not only think about what new things to do, but also to think about building on what you have, what you already have started to do as a state, but maybe haven't been able to really serve as many people as you'd like. So a couple of takeaways. So one is successful programs tend to provide comprehensive services. So I think I mentioned Career Pathways bundles together a lot of these leading strategies, and that's because we find the sum is greater than the parts. If you just do career and academic counseling at community technical college but not financial aid, that doesn't have as big an impact as if you have financial aid. You take those two things and you add industry partnerships to make sure your training connects to what employers need, well then, you're really having an impact. So the sum is greater than the parts. So think comprehensively, work closely with employers. Secondly, helping low-income workers upgrade skills, as I mentioned, is critical if increasing wages is a goal. So, if you want to boost family incomes, which again, in turn can boost child outcomes, increasing wages is really important to that. Third, even in a strong economy, states need strategies to support people who work consistently but can't earn enough to support their families. And as Tessa mentioned, there's a lot of low-wage jobs in Wisconsin, so those are going to be needed even if you're doing these other things like skill upgrading. And lastly, specialized services for those with multiple barriers can be very effective. It's not a large segment of the population that needs it, but for those who do need it, it can make all the difference between them being part of the workforce or not. And I guess the last thing I just wanted to say is to leave you with maybe a sense of urgency, because a tight labor market is going to be the best opportunity you'll have for a very long time to integrate low-income adults into the workforce and help people who've been left behind in the economy. And that won't last forever. We know with economic cycles, we will eventually have a downturn. So just encourage you to think about grasping the moment. Thank you.